Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 700 or 859, and today is December 11th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to talk about on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just remember to follow all my work, all the articles I talk about on today's show. This show, the Kyle Anzalone Show, all found at my Ets account at Kyle Anzalone _. You can also subscribe to this show and the Kyle Anzalone Show on YouTube. Later today, 4:45 Eastern, Dave DeCamp, the great Dave DeCamp, returns to the Kyle Anzalone Show. Very excited about that. All right, let's start off here today with this article that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on December 8th. Congressional leaders release $901 billion military spending bill. And so this is the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act. Now, both the House and Senate passed different versions of the NDAA, so it goes to conference committee. This happens every single year. Typically, anything good in the NDAA gets stripped out in the conference committee, and then what the American people are actually given as a defense spending bill is what's put together by congressional leadership behind closed doors. And these are typically the most establishment politicians, the one most deeply embedded with the military industrial complex, the Israel lobby, most committed to the war in Ukraine. And so what ends up in the NDAAs are usually all horrific. And that is mostly the case here. So they actually increase the total price tag of the bill from $893 billion to $901 billion. Of course, this isn't all of the defense spending the U.S. Has every year. This is just the spending that goes for most Pentagon programs and the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons programs. So this bill is usually hundreds, thousands of pages long. It includes all kinds of different provisions. A lot of the debate with the NDAA, in the past few years has been about, we need to either put, more wokeness into the military or get wokeness out of the military. So it has to do with are we going to pay for surgery for transgender service members and things like that? Right, we're really not talking about the core issues. With none of that's on the table, right? It's all like kind of little things, and typically slowly ratcheting up the American war state. So a couple really important things in this legislation. The compromise NDAA will require President Donald Trump to keep at least 76,000 American troops in Europe. I don't think there's a real threat here of Trump, say, exiting NATO, but that's what this piece of the legislation is about, right? Trying to tie the president in his hands and make sure we maintain all of our foreign commitments overseas, no matter how impossible it is, no matter how much debt we're racking up. We can never look to the military as a way to find savings for the American taxpayer. Additionally, the legislation mandates that the U.S. maintain at least 28,500 soldiers in South Korea. I don't see Trump really even going in the direction and drawing down soldiers in South Korea. So I'm not sure if this even needed to be in the legislation, but I think it's worth noting that this is where the mentality of Congress is. The NDAA provides $800 million for military aid to Ukraine over the next 2 years. This is $400 million in 2026 and $400 million in 2027. That goes to the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. This is the fund. So there's been two main funds that the U.S. has used to arm Ukraine since 2022. The majority is the PDA. These are the Presidential Drawdown Authority funds, where Congress gives the president money to buy new military equipment, and then he could transfer the old military equipment to other countries overseas, right? So if the president, gets $100 million in the PDA, and he says, all right, I'm going to buy 100 new Humvees, then we're going to send 100 to Ukraine. The Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, USAI, is the fund where the U.S. government goes to Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, whoever, Northrop Grumman, whoever else, and they say, hey, we want to do a contract for you to produce new anti-tank missiles, and we're going to buy them for the Ukrainians. And so there's been billions and billions of dollars put into the USAI over the years. I'm not sure, and I would be really curious to find out of what's happening now when the USAI weapons that were purchased, the contract was made under Joe Biden, so they're effectively purchased, 2 years ago, but because they needed to produce the weapons, they're now rolling off the factory lines. Are those still going to Ukraine or not? Would seem like a pretty major thing to have answered, and I'm really not sure about that. So the NDAA will also lift sanctions on Syria, which is noteworthy just because Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, the former commander of al-Qaeda in Syria, a deputy of the Islamic State, a veteran of the Iraq War, having fought for al-Qaeda in Iraq, is the self-declared president of Syria. And so, I'm not for maintaining the economic war on Syria, but we can't stop yelling and mentioning that our elected leaders prefer Al Qaeda ruling Syria over a secular dictator. It's absolutely disgusting that our leaders would treat us this way. One last thing, and this is the one piece of good news. This is the kind of thing that typically would get stripped out of the NDAA during conference committee. The bill repeals the 1991 and the 2002 authorizations for use of military force. This was the AUMFs, which Congress has. It's not a declaration of war, right? They should actually make a declaration of war if we're going to war. But since the end of World War II, Congress has really used these AUMFs to give the president basically a declaration of war. I don't necessarily like framing it that way, because I do think we should call on our congressional leaders to actually declare war and not pass these vague AUMFs that are stretched beyond all belief and give the president a lot of leeway to wage war essentially wherever he wants, is the way that they've been used. But just to say that, that's what the legislation was intended for, right? Now, it's good that they're getting these off the books, because if they just hang around, who knows what they could possibly be used for. Like, say, if another country invaded Kuwait, would they try to use the language from the 1991 AUMF to say, well, Congress gave the president war to defend Kuwait, so we're going back into Kuwait? And you might think to yourself, Kyle, that sounds absurd. But President Donald Trump invoked the 2002 AUMF, which was the one that authorized the Iraq War, to kill General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad in 2020. And of course, the way that they stretched the language of the AUMF there was to say, well, this gives us permission to take out any threat in Iraq. And so, you could see how, and I think there's a good possibility that the Trump administration is relying on the 2001 AUMF, the one that was passed in the wake of 9/11, to go after al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, to conduct the strikes on drug boats in the Caribbean. So it's good that these are being taken off the books. However, the 2001 AUMF is the problem. That's the one that needs to be repealed. These are largely defunct. I think the Trump administration probably will have killed Soleimani with or without the 2002 AUMF on the books. And so it's good that they're gone, but real progress would be removing the 2001 AUMF. All right, next up here, a little bit more fallout to get into from the September 2nd strike on the alleged drug boat in the Caribbean. This was the one, there were 11 people on the boat. The Pentagon carries out a strike. They killed 9 of the 11 passengers. And then my understanding is there's video showing the last 2 men attempting to cling to the wreckage of the boat. And Like maybe they're trying to push some of the wreckage together in order to sit on top of it, or maybe find like some kind of communication equipment to call for help. Whatever they were doing, they were clearly no longer, even if the boat was loaded up with only fentanyl, right? Like in the most absurd interpretation of what the Trump administration says, now that these people are neutralized, they are no longer threats. They have been taken off of the battlefield, and yet the military conducted a second strike to kill them. And this was, according to the Washington Post, on the orders of Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, who said to kill everybody. So now Congress, I think this video should be made public for the American people to be able to judge for themselves just the sadism of this strike. But Congress is at least saying that the full body needs to see this to kind of understand what our military operations are in the Caribbean. And Pete Hegseth refused to commit to that to Congress. So we will see how this develops. I hope pressure stays up on this. Again, I do understand the point that a lot of people in the non-interventionist, anti-war sphere are making, that, hey, all these strikes are war crimes. All these strikes are extrajudicial killings. And so to focus just on the secondary strike on September 2nd may, to some people, be interpreted as like a tacit admission that all the other strikes aren't war crimes. I think it's important to focus on this one just because of how clear of a war crime it is, where, again, even if everything the administration says is true, right? Like if you're talking to the most pro-Trump person you don't have to argue about if that boat was carrying fentanyl or not, if Maduro leads a narco-terrorist cartel or not, if these people were coming to the United States at all, or if they are even carrying. You could leave all that aside, right? And it's still a war crime. And so I think it makes for a very effective argument to people to make, where you're not going to have a half hour to sit down with them and explain everything. You're going to have like a 3-minute discussion about this. So I think that is really important that we stay on this issue. This article, Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, December 9th. Trump won't rule out ground invasion of Venezuela, says Maduro's days are numbered. So this was in an interview with Politico on Monday. Trump said, when asked about regime change, war, and a ground invasion of Ukraine, he said, I don't want to rule it out. I don't want to talk about it. Why would I talk about it to you, an extremely unfriendly publication? And so, Donald Trump is in this really weird spot where during his first administration, he was antagonistic and insulting towards the mainstream media. And I think, look, it resonated with me. I think it probably did well with Americans because they were all on board the Russiagate thing. They had all, said, oh, Donald Trump is coming up with fake news. And he kind of turns around the fake news label and applies it to them. And so, it was more effective. Now he is just combative with the media 24/7. Anytime they're asking him questions on anything, and it's not just like, we heard that you paid prostitutes to pee on a bed that Barack and Michelle Obama slept on. You're owned by Vladimir Putin. You know what I mean? Like, it would be different if he was just doing this to Rachel Maddow and Jim Acosta, but he is doing this to every single reporter, and reporters asking him genuine questions about what's going on in the world and how he is going to respond to it as a commander-in-chief. This is really important information for Americans to have. So, I find that very problematic. I do wonder, and this isn't in any way to absolve Trump of, his attitude, but it does seem to me like he is like a combative old man at this point where, some people, as they cognitively decline, they turn mushy like Joe Biden did. Others get really jolly and happy, and others turn into complete dits. And that seems to be the path that Donald Trump is kind of going down mentally. And For people who really like Trump and who would argue that a part of his more combative and aggressive nature is because of the persecution that him and his family face after he was out of office in 2020, I think that's a fair point. I also think that this behavior and this way of handling the media has gone from you know legitimately having issues with a non-independent media that was attacking him to now just being openly combative against the media, which is preventing the American people from having the information they need to have. Would be nice if rather than sitting down with all these outlets and just insulting them, that Donald Trump would go back to the podcast circuit that he did so well on as a candidate. And, you know, because this won't fly if he does this with Joe Rogan, right? He can't tell Joe Rogan, I don't want to talk about it. Why would I talk about it with you? You're very unfriendly. I don't like you. You know, let's get somebody who's been critical of Trump on policy issues, but clearly is an anti-Trump to ask him these questions and see how it goes. All right, last up here, more U.S. piracy, not last up on Venezuela, more U.S. piracy in the Caribbean. Trump, U.S. seized very large oil tanker near Venezuela. Don't have a ton of details on this one. Trump said this on Monday. We've just seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela, a very large tanker, very large, the largest one ever seized, actually. Other things are happening, and he didn't go on to provide more details, but just that Trump has gone back. He did this in his first administration, I think more targeting Iran than Venezuela, but just, you know, open acts of piracy on the high seas. Trump is the new pirate of the Caribbean, I guess. All right, moving on here. This article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on December 7th. Zelensky, Ukraine will be ready to hold elections in 90 days. So Ukrainian President Zelensky said he was willing to hold new elections, and these remarks only came after President Donald Trump said Ukraine was sliding away from democracy. This is his quote, "Look, I'm ready for the elections, and not only that, I'm now asking, and I am stating this openly for the United States of America to help me. And then at 60 to 90 days, Ukraine will be ready to hold elections. I personally have the will and readiness to do so." Lots of questions here. He does go on in his statement to say we have to find a way to secure Ukraine to hold the elections. In some sense, I think that's fair, right? Like if Russia is launching drone strikes on Ukraine as the polls are open, that is going to cause people to not be able to vote. And then depending on how widespread it is and how narrow the election is, that could call the election results into question. So, you know, if Ukraine is going to hold elections, maybe Donald Trump needs to go to Vladimir Putin and say, like, commit to not carrying out airstrikes for like the 48 hours surrounding the election or something like that. That's a possibility. Of course, there's other issues like what to do with the territory that Ukraine still claims in the Donbass in southern Ukraine. That is clearly Russia now, right? Like Russia has annexed this territory, their troops hold it. Ukraine has no prospects in the coming years to be able to launch a counteroffensive to retake Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Donetsk. And so how to handle that? You know what I mean? Like there are legitimate questions and complexities here that I do think will make it difficult for Ukraine to hold elections. But it's probably difficult and could be done if Zelensky really did want to hold elections. I think there's a good possibility that Zelensky doesn't want to actually hold elections, and this is more of a ploy to kind of appease Donald Trump, where he could put out these conditions, say, I want to hold elections. He says, we need these reasonable conditions met, but he could also ensure that those reasonable conditions aren't met. right? Like if Russia says, okay, we'll agree to not conduct strikes on the day of Ukraine's election if Ukraine stops attacking our oil infrastructure, well, then all Ukraine has to do is launch an attack on a Russian refinery, and then Russia won't commit to the ceasefire, and then Zelensky could say, well, I try to hold elections, but Vladimir Putin. So I am pretty sure that Ukraine isn't going to hold elections in the first quarter of 2026. I feel fairly confident in that, unless Zelensky is really looking for an out. Like maybe he realizes that he will have to take a deal and he can't stay in Ukraine. Like he has to leave Ukraine. He has to retire to Miami or Israel or wherever the hell else that he wants to live with his billions of dollars that he's stolen from the American, European, and Ukrainian taxpayers. I guess nothing in that Zelensky has had or done makes me think that he is moving in that direction. But I do want to open it up as a possibility, because when you look at Zelensky, like a decade ago, he was, like kind of a Ukrainian Rob Schneider or something like that, right? He was making probably like C-list rom-com, kind of dumb comedy movies that maybe had some appeal, but before he ran for president, he wasn't like a politician seeking power. Now, once he's had that power for almost a decade, it's probably hard to give up, and maybe he has adopted like the mindset of a politician to never leave office. But I just want to throw it out there that, maybe he is now ready and looking for an out, that he sees this war is coming to a close. So interesting questions there. This one I wrote for judgenapp.com on December 9th. Trump gives Zelensky days to respond to peace proposal and wants a ceasefire in Ukraine by Christmas. And then I wrote the follow-up on the 10th at the Institute. Ukraine sends response to Trump's peace proposal. So I have not found any of the details of the proposal or actually even know what the current American proposal looks like. And I don't think anybody does, because we had the initial 28-point Trump peace plan, which is leaked. Then we have Marco Rubio meeting with Zelensky's former chief of staff, who has now resigned over corruption in Europe, and then revising that down to a 19-point plan that gave Ukraine more territory and gave Ukraine stronger security guarantees and had more of the frozen Russian funds used to rebuild Ukraine than Trump's initial 28-point proposal. And now they say that the proposal is 20 points. It doesn't seem to me, from kind of reading between the lines of the reporting and the statements, that Zelensky agreed to Trump's 20-point proposal, but rather the Ukrainians wrote back a point-by-point response to Trump's peace plan. I'm guessing they're asking for changes, stronger security guarantees. Now, Trump says that the Russians are fine with this 20-point proposal, but until we actually know what's in it, this could just be Trump being Trump and saying things that aren't true. This could also be Trump's legitimate and accurate assessment of the situation. All right, moving on to Israel news before we wrap up here, starting off with this article that I wrote at the Institute on December 8th. A proposal by Israel calls for spending about $750 million, $740 million on propaganda in 2026. Israel calls it public diplomacy, or Hasbara. The plan calls for increasing the budget by almost fivefold. It was $150 million this year. It will be 700 and I believe 39 in 2026. The significant boost to public diplomacy comes as Israel's public image is drastically sagging, particularly in the U.S. We've gotten the pretty notorious reports over the past few months that Israel is paying some influencers $7,000 a post to say public positive things about Israel. Israel's planning to spend $150 million to influence popular AI chatbots to give responses that are more positive to Israel. And they are bringing like American state level lawmakers, pastors, and things like that over to Israel to give them propaganda tours. So, next up here, at least 110 Palestinians died in Israeli detention over the past 26 months. This is a story that I have been trying to cover over the past 2 years. I think I've probably written about 24 of these stories now, just updating the situation for Palestinians in Israeli detention. You know, they don't call these people hostages because a small number of them are actual criminals. You know what I mean? Like they've actually committed crimes against Israelis, the state of Israel, and people who have attacked civilians actually do deserve to be imprisoned. However, the vast number of these people are there in administrative detention without charge or trial, not seeing a judge, and even the Israeli government would admit that they have no ties to Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or any other Palestinian militant group. So a lot of these people dying in Israeli prison are innocent civilians, and Israel is doing far worse to Palestinians who are completely innocent than Hamas did to, say, Israeli hostages that they were holding. 110 Palestinians now dead. Many seem to be deaths of deprivation or results of torture, denial of medical care, lack of food, starvation. It's absolutely horrific. And this is intentional policy, by the way. This isn't like maybe a few bad apples or one prison warden who's a real dick. This is Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Israeli national security minister who runs the prison system, has publicly touted the policy of torturing Palestinians and denying them food, medical care, and things like that. All right. I guess we'll go here next. We'll go to the West Bank. Israel approves the new settlement expansion of 800 new homes. The statement from Bezalel Smotrich, that's the finance minister's office, said that the new government of Israel, the current government of Israel that took charge in December of 2022, so 3 years ago now, has approved 51,000 new settlement homes in the West Bank. And of course, the whole plan here is to kill the idea of ever having an independent Palestinian state by basically making it impossible for there to be a continuous Palestinian state in the West Bank, because it's been turned into Swiss cheese by all the Israeli settlements, and it soon will be bisected by Israeli settlements. And Bezalel Smotrich said this will bury the idea of a Palestinian state. This was a really interesting story. In a way, I'm surprised it hasn't gotten more attention. In another way, I'm not. Israel spying on U.S. forces in Gaza monitoring center, angering Washington. And so this is the CMCC. It's the Command Military Civil Coordination Center. And this is the group of international soldiers and Israeli soldiers, along with some diplomats and other planners, who are kind of monitoring the ceasefire in Gaza. Not really, because Israel is violating every day, and they're not like putting out statements saying that, oh boy, Israel's violating the ceasefire too much. They're also supposed to like kind of be planning for phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement that we'll probably never get to. But one interesting note in the story on this was that particularly European diplomats are actually afraid to go to the CMCC because Palestinians are not allowed to be a part of the planning for the future of Gaza. And they say that this is a clear violation of international law. So Israel is apparently spying on all the foreign soldiers that are at the CMCC. And sources told The Guardian that Lieutenant General Patrick Frank, the American commander at the CMCC, summoned his Israeli counterpart and demanded that the spying has to stop. We'll see if the Israelis listen. Something tells me that they won't. Now, an update on the progression of Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza and moving into phase 2 of that deal. Hamas has now returned almost all the Israeli hostages, I think 27 of the 28 bodies plus the 20 living captives. They are apparently still looking for the body of the 28th captive. As I have said, I've been very surprised that Hamas has been able to find and return such a large number of the Israeli captive bodies so quickly. And so hopefully they find this last body and they get them back to the Israelis soon. Give some comfort to the family of the fallen, but more importantly, it will give Israel one less excuse not to move on to phase 2 of the negotiations, while Hamas seems to be trying to submit proposals to make compromises to work on to phase 2. The Israelis are making it clear that they have no interest in them. So Hamas has said they're willing to agree to freeze all their military operations against Israel for over a decade. They're willing to either bury their weapons or put them in storage, and they have said that, you know, if there's a creation of an independent Palestinian state, they will then give their weapons to that Palestinian government. Israel has pretty much made it clear that they have no intention of agreeing to anything short of, I guess I shouldn't say removing every last gun from Gaza, but demilitarizing Gaza, which I think the Israeli interpretation is going to be getting rid of even all the small arms. In addition to that, the Israeli, the chief of staff of the IDF, Zamir, said that Israel's current position in Gaza is the new border of Israel, and the Trump peace plan would call for Israel to undergo further withdrawals. And so I think it's pretty clear that Israel has no intention of allowing this deal to move forward. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping it up for today, but there will be another episode of Kyle Anzalone Show this week, 4:45 Eastern today. It is the great Dave DeCamp returning to the show. Thanks, everyone.